Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday night. It is 7 p.m. Eastern Time, which means we are back with another episode of Mass Office Hours Live. We are 2 minutes late, and that is completely on me. The most extreme case of tardiness that we've had in office hours history. I sincerely apologize, and I will probably submit my resignation in short time. But tonight, we do have an episode to do. I'm joined by the great Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple, joining us all the way from Canada. I know with the internet you can connect all over the place, but it does feel extra special when you're coming all the way in from the great up north. So, Lauren, thanks for joining us, and how are you doing tonight?
Very happy to be here 2 weeks in a row.
2 weeks in a row. That is a record for you and for all co-hosts, I believe. We have a lot to get into tonight, and I did slow us down with the start here, so let me get the important stuff out of the way. If you like the show and you feel inclined to support it, there are many ways you could do that. You can like, rate, subscribe, review, share it with a friend, send the links all over the place, post it on your social media, whatever you want to do, get the word out. If you want to become part of the show, you can submit questions. Best way to do that is in the live chat on YouTube. But of course, you can do that after the show airs using the link in the description of this video. The best preferred way to support, obviously, office hours are brought to you by the Mass Research Review. If you really want to become a top tier level 1 gold star supporter, you could think about subscribing to the Mass Research Review. That is our monthly publication where we talk about all the newest and most practical and important studies related to exercise, training, nutrition, health, etc. We cover those studies every single month, first of the month that goes out. Yeah, think about giving that a look, and you can find out more at massresearchreview.com. Now, Lauren, I think we should jump right into the chat because we've got a lovely chat going here. Not a lot of true crime talk in the chat, which you alluded to last week, but we do have a little college football talk. Someone asked, Lauren, how do you feel about that Alabama game?
I don't see that in the chat, so I don't think it exists.
Oh, no, they said Trex, please comment on Bama's loss. My mistake. Yeah, so Bama's loss, that was wild. I was watching that game, and the ending was absolutely fantastic. Super exciting. I am a little bit hurt because back in the day, that kind of upset would have been like, it would change the whole landscape of college football. Now that they have expanded to the 12-game playoff, those types of games have a little bit less impact. I'm not going to be like super negative about it. There's pros and cons to the 12-team playoff, obviously, but it does take a little bit of the sting out of those upsets when you root for a highly ranked team, but it also takes the intrigue out of the what in the world happens next kind of question. So wonderful game, really a great weekend of college football top to bottom. Let's see here. Yeah. So we've got, I want to answer one more question that's for real about football before we get back to the top. This is a real question, Lauren. Don't roll your eyes like that. Someone asked, does Trexler have any thoughts on the damage incurred to athletes playing college football, mainly the concussions and risks for CTE? I do have thoughts. So I did my PhD at UNC Chapel Hill, and our department, Exercise and Sports Science, actually housed the Gefeller Center, which was a huge nationally recognized concussion research center where they did a ton of concussion, mostly on athletes, also did some things with Department of Defense for blast injuries and things like that. But our department, concussion was really the talk of the town. And a lot of our really highly ranked researchers worked in that area. So yeah, we would always see the little seminar talks about kind of the newest advancements. And, as someone who's had 3 concussions myself, 3 diagnosed concussions that were, serious enough to kind of knock me unconscious for a bit. It's something that I always keep an eye on. I think, football, obviously there is relatively high concussion risk, but I do think that sometimes people overstate, they make it just a football issue. The reality is with a lot of high-level sport, the higher you go, the more likely that there is some kind of trade-off in terms of being elite in that endeavor for 25 years of your life. You talk to athletes who excelled really at anything for a long period of time, and they'll talk about, oh man, I can feel it in my knees now that I'm 50, or I can feel it in my back now that I'm 50. So there's really nothing unique about, making that trade-off between health or comfort later in life and performance. Of course, the thing about concussion is that you can limp along with a sore knee. If your brain function is impaired, now we're talking about just a catastrophic impact on so many areas of day-to-day life. But again, it's not just a football thing. When I would read their papers about sport-related concussion, yes, football, you get a lot of concussions, but we see concussions in rugby. We see a surprising amount in soccer. Really any sport where people, might bang into each other, bang into a ball, or fall and bang their head against the ground. That's a really common mechanism of injury for concussion. So all of that is to say, I'm really, I embrace advancements in the sport that try to make it safer and reduce that concussion risk. There are a lot of different ways that people have talked about doing that. And I think it's good that football is one of those sports, like, if you follow baseball, Lauren, am I bringing you into the tent here with baseball? Are you a baseball fan?
Nah.
Okay. To be fair, there are no baseball fans. They're like dinosaurs. Baseball was cool in the 1920s, and it fell off pretty hard. But nonetheless, I'm sure no one will get upset about me saying that. But I go to a bunch of Duke baseball games. I'm a fan, but there aren't many out there. But what was I saying? I was talking about football. Oh, yeah. So sports like baseball are so slow to embrace change. That's changing now that they're kind of like getting into the pitch clock and things like that. But one thing I have to credit football with is that, by and large, a lot of football leagues have really embraced a variety of adaptations and changes to try to make the sport safer. And we can look back now and pretend with revisionist history that it was some kind of seamless, easy process. But people were angry that when we first started rolling out some of these rules and changes to the game that have apparently made the game a little bit safer, people did not like it. And I do have to credit organizations like the NFL with sticking with it and saying, we're going to put up with the extreme anger and vitriol and do this in the interest of health. Now, the NFL, of course, is not a charity. You can look at the history of concussion-related concerns and find plenty of stuff to not applaud them for. But all of that is to say, football, I'm glad that they're taking steps to make it safer. I do like the push to delay contact. Back when I was a kid, you had like first graders just like slamming into each other with helmets. A lot of folks are getting more into flag football for children and then saying, okay, once you get into 7th or 8th grade or whatever, now it's time to put some pads on and figure this out. So all of that is to say, I think with any sport, there are some of these trade-offs, and I'm certainly not. I've talked to some people who are like, football has such a catastrophic concussion injury, it's not going to exist. And I've heard people literally give like a 5-year time horizon for that. That's absolutely insane. There's no metric you could possibly point to actually justify that belief. I think football's alive and well. I think it's here to stay, and I hope that they continue to make it safer. All right, Lauren, we need to get to stuff that you care about, or at least will tolerate for the remainder of the show.
I do have a comment about the CTE.
Good, yeah.
Topic. Just because you have to wonder if we're only looking at the people who think there was an issue, and then, post-mortem, they're donating their brains to science, which is amazing. But is there a bit of, we're not looking across the board, right? We're not looking at people who were competing in other sports or people who didn't have a lot of concussions. And so I just, not to say it's not an issue, I think it is an issue, but the data isn't at a point where we can say confidently that we can compare that to people who weren't playing football. So I think it might not be as much of an issue as one would think.
Yeah, I agree, and I think when you make that kind of statement, people are like, people think you're minimizing a serious issue, and that's not the case. You point out a really important consideration, which is that we have very poor epidemiological data or prevalence data related to CTE specifically, as kind of an extension of, we believe it is preceded by repeated head trauma. But we really don't know, for example, what is the prevalence of CTE in people that do not report a history of concussions or even competitive sport. Or what is the prevalence for people who had 2 concussions in their life because they slipped on ice one time and got in a car accident another time. And I'm interested to see, as we develop more larger databases where we can get better population level estimates. I'm curious to see, honestly, is it really the concussions or is it the sub-concussion, very mild brain injury that occurs from very constant repeated hitting? So, for example, I think football has done a really good job reducing the prevalence and the occurrence of the really big hit where the receiver's going over the middle, a defensive back just absolutely crushes them, and they have a really obvious concussion right there on the field. I think football has done a good job of eliminating that without looking at any of the data, and I could be wrong. But it feels like in the data part of my stomach that prevalence has gone down a bit, or that incidence. But I'm curious to see, how much that impacts some of the numbers we're seeing versus, is it really those big hits or is it the small hits that we see with a offensive lineman, defensive lineman over and over and over? They're hitting each other from 2 feet away. They're not going to get knocked out cold, but that's also not a negligible impact to the head when you multiply it by thousands over thousands over thousands. So all of that is to say, you raise a great point, Lauren, and I will tell you from being inside that, from being on the periphery of that world, having colleagues in that world, at the time I was in grad school, 2013 to 2018, there was extremely vigorous debate where some of the leading labs in the country thought others were maybe exaggerating some elements of the issue, and others were accused of downplaying some elements of the issue. And that's because the true severity of it, like you said, Lauren, was very much open to interpretation, and there was a paucity of data to feel like there was really a scientific consensus. All right.
Speaking of non-contact sports,
Yeah.
Tina is in Vegas at the Olympia.
Oh, wow.
Is that something that you are following as a pro natural bodybuilder?
Gonna get back on stage any day now, but no, I am not. I haven't been tapped into the bodybuilding world for a while. I've been more following the sport of health and wellness and public health methods and things like that. Yeah, but hey, I hope everyone has a good time. I hope everyone does well. I hope everyone wins, Lauren. The first ever tie where everyone on stage gets the first place medal. Wouldn't that be heartwarming and terrific?
Everyone loves it when everyone gets a trophy, so
Yes.
Absolutely.
Completely non-controversial statement by me.
100%.
All right. But yeah, have fun out there at the Olympia. I will say, I used to go to the Arnold Classic because it was held in my hometown, and I was like really, really into powerlifting and bodybuilding. So obviously you're going to stop by. Because I lived in Columbus for 4 years. And even if you're not there to like watch the competition and root for a particular person, those places have a really fun atmosphere. Like it is a fun time to walk around the expo hall. I've never been to the Olympia, but if it's anything like the Arnold Classic, if you're a lifter, meathead, fitness enthusiast, try to get out to either the Olympia or the Arnold Classic, because it really is a pretty fun time. Again, I've never been to the Olympia, but I can definitely recommend going to the Arnold Classic. And if you do, go to Schmidt's, the restaurant in German Village. It is an extremely authentic German restaurant. Get a big beer and a cream puff. They're very good.
You heard it here.
You heard it here. Pro cream puff. All right. So Lauren, we got a question here from a 57-year-old who has been competing all their life in endurance events. They started lifting 2 years ago. They want to keep competing at a top level in endurance events for as long as they can, and they're wondering if they should prioritize power, strength, or hypertrophy with their resistance training. I will say I am upset that Mike isn't here, because that question is definitely within his wheelhouse. Personally, I don't know if it would make a massive difference if you are lifting for the purpose of facilitating endurance sport. And with that in mind, I would probably aim for a fairly time-efficient training program that covers your bases, because in the lifting world, we get really hung up on whether you're training for this, that, or the other. But often we lose sight, and Lauren, as someone who's kind of, tapped into like research in geriatric populations, for example, when we put in resistance training of any kind, we say, great, these people are going to have increases in strength, power, and hypertrophy, right? So we don't necessarily have to choose one and forsake the other two. And I would suggest that as an endurance athlete, if you're keeping things in a fairly moderate area where maybe you're doing 5 to 8 repetitions per set, you're probably getting the best of all worlds, and that's probably where I'd spend the most of my time. But if you love training for power, you love training for strength specifically, or you just love a good hypertrophy program, I struggle to imagine that you're going to notice a really dramatic difference from one or the other with regards to endurance performance. But I will acknowledge I'm shooting from the hip there, Lauren. Do you agree, disagree, want to argue about it?
I would just say if the primary goal is continued endurance performance, then you want to make sure that whatever lifting program you implement doesn't hinder your endurance performance and your endurance training. So I would try to keep it, at least initially, fairly low volume since it's new for you, and make sure that you aren't performing exercises that are leaving you sore for a day or two such that they interfere with your endurance training.
Yeah, definitely a good addition. I co-sign on that. Now, I got a question for the other Eric, or about the other Eric.
He's
Helms.
not here, so we don't care.
It is an interesting question, though. I think we can at least entertain it. We're not anti-Helms.
I thought we just took any opportunity to hate on Helms that we could.
No, I would never do such a thing.
Sorry.
So Cole was asking, Helms' recent gains as an advanced lifter. I've seen no such gains. I don't know what they're talking about. Do you think these gains will stay at his old training volumes? So I am aware that Helms allegedly has made gains. Can't really confirm or deny, but he's been doing some like really high volume training, and he's been leaning into the controversial concept that there may be diminishing but not negligible returns at some pretty high levels of volume. I think specifically for upper body, he's doing a lot of set volume. And it's an interesting question, if he makes these gains on this really high volume program that a lot of people would consider just too much. A lot of people are not going to be willing to spend that much time in the gym and do that many sets. Can he, after achieving those gains, slide back down the volume spectrum and kind of settle in at a more moderate level while retaining all of those gains? Lauren, you are better equipped to answer this than I am. I am going to throw again, I'm shooting from the hip here. It's a gut feeling. I think in the short term, if he decided, hey, for the next month, I want to scale back the volume, I think in the short term, he would do a really nice job maintaining whatever gains we can attribute to all this extra volume. But if he was going to say, cool, now that I made my gains, I am going to essentially turn down the knobs on my training stimulus and just do that for the next 3 years, I do think that he probably would regress to a settling point that is then essentially compatible with his new level of training stimulus that's frankly been turned down a bit. So a lot of people will look at some classic studies where people drop their volume by a lot and were able to maintain a lot of the progress that they made. But, maybe you can get away with that for a month or 2 months or, some kind of short time frame. But eventually, after a while, it's kind of just like, this is just how you train now, and this is just what your current stimulus is for the growth or maintenance of muscle tissue. And unfortunately, muscle tissue, when it comes to our training stimulus and our dietary inputs that facilitate our gains, you can't put it in a bank. Your body's not going to say, well, you did that high volume block 3 years ago, so I'm sure it'll be fine. So that'd be my take. What do you think, Lauren?
Yeah, I think that when we're talking about more moderate volumes and maintaining muscle over time, it's reasonable to think that if you put in a bunch of work as a newbie, then it will take less than what you were doing on the way up to kind of maintain that. But when we're talking about small but meaningful gains with a particular training program at a very high volume that isn't going to be sustainable, then I don't think there's really any evidence that we can look to support the idea that you would be able to maintain that. I think just from a sort of adherence perspective, from a variety of angles, you could say, well, maybe you should oscillate between those higher volumes and then more maintenance and then higher and more maintenance, and then maybe that can help you. But I kind of think it might end up being what we see with people who are trying to sustain low body fat levels, where it's like at some point it's just not going to work out and you have to kind of come back to something that's more reasonable and sustainable with your daily life.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we've got a question here about stretching and mobility. This is not an area where I spend a lot of time on a personal level or digging through the research, but I will field the question and we'll see if we can get a useful answer between the two of us here. So Corey asks, any thoughts on stretching or mobility routines separate from workouts for general health, avoiding stiffness, and to complement strength training? Any ideas to get started? I, throughout my 7-year-long issue with nerve pain, at one point was working with a physical therapist who said, hey, you're remarkably tight, you should stretch. And so my approach to getting started with stretching was to just go to some entry-level yoga classes at my gym. I really love my gym, and a nice thing about it is that the yoga classes, if you're a member, you can just roll up and take them. You don't have to shell out a bunch of money for them. So I was like, hey, the yoga classes are there. I can roll in and take them. They even do hot yoga, and Lauren, that was fun. I enjoyed hot yoga because I like hanging out in the sauna, so I felt like I was getting the best of both worlds there. But anyway, that was my approach to getting started, because there is a lot when you think about, okay, how am I going to essentially go into this new, for me, modality of exercise and put together a comprehensive program that's kind of checking all the boxes. So I don't really have like a great routine or resource I would send someone toward. Obviously, there's a lot of folks who make mobility and stretching related content. And you can kind of pick your poison in terms of all the diverse approaches out there. I think that if when someone asks me, hey, stretching / mobility work, targeted work, is it worth it? My biggest question to them is, do you have a mobility or flexibility issue, right? So like if you have like completely average mobility, you find it quite comfortable to achieve the ranges of motion that make up the activities you do. You're not experiencing any pain related to stiffness or lack of mobility. If your body feels good and is doing the things you need to do, and you don't have any like really glaring, overly tight muscles, when someone asks me, hey, should I stretch more? I'm like, if you like it, if it feels good. But other than that, it's not really going to be high on my list of priorities. However, if you are someone who's noticing that excessive tightness or lack of mobility is getting in the way of the way you want to train, or causing pain, or causing anything under that general umbrella of not good things, then I'd say, yeah, it's probably worthwhile to take a crack at it. You might consider doing more dynamic oriented mobility work prior to workouts, and then either after workouts or sometime later in the day, you might do more static stretching that works on building up your base of flexibility. Again, obviously, you're going to want to find a program that seems sensible relative to where you're entering. You don't want to go straight to the ultra advanced yoga master program, but find something that kind of meets you where you're at, and something that really focuses on the areas that are causing you the most trouble. That would be my 2 cents. Lauren, anything to add on the general value of stretching and mobility work, and or how to get started?
Not much, except to say, the idea of complementing strength training or avoiding stiffness. If you're feeling like, you're not getting as much mobility when you're going to the gym for your lifting session, then I would say start light. Make sure you're doing some warm-ups with low loads, and you're not just going in and doing your initial set at a higher load. If you're squatting, start with the body weight, start with the bar, and make sure that you are kind of accomplishing the range of motion that you're hoping to reach in your working sets. For me, that's my preference, is to whatever exercise I'm planning on doing, warm up in a way that's conducive to performing that exercise, as opposed to the sort of general warm up or stretching that we might have done in gym class in high school.
Yeah, Lauren, I don't know if you noticed this, but you mentioned sports and the chat just lights up. We had some great discussion going on in the chat. Did you see any of that?
I heard some people say that they wanted to fast forward to the end of the football discussion, but other than that, no, that's all I saw.
I didn't see that, but I do want to give a shout out for a hilarious comment. When I said that there are no fans of baseball, someone said, I'm a fan of drinking outdoors, and that extends to baseball. And that really is what baseball is. And then another person said baseball games are a good hang. So yeah, baseball is essentially a leisure time activity for the people watching it, just to kind of have an excuse to go outside and relax. Apparently, there's a hockey commissioner that denies any link at all between head trauma and CTE. So, Lauren, I think that's even more skeptical than you are of the data to deny any link whatsoever. Okay, let's dive back into the fitness questions here. Well, someone mentioned that they hope Dr. Zordos is safe. Can confirm Dr. Zordos is alive and well. He's safe, doing great, but he's a busy man, so he's not here tonight. But yeah, so he's doing well. Appreciate your concern there. Lauren, this one, I'm going to let you go first here, because
Okay.
You are from one of the most reputable protein labs in the world. The question is, what are your thoughts on collagen protein in bars and other supplements? Do you have any strong feelings about collagen?
From what we know about collagen supplementation, at least for muscle, is that it's inferior to whey protein. And when we look at the composition of most protein bars, it's usually some combination of whey or whey and casein or some sort of milk protein that would be marketing it as a protein bar for lifters. So this is an interesting question, because I recently purchased 2 protein bars of the same brand. They look identical, but one was, the traditional one, and the other one was a crisp version. And I didn't think to look at the ingredients, but I ate them both, and the one was the crisp one was quite a different texture. And I subsequently read the ingredients, and in that kind of lighter, fluffier bar, the protein source was collagen. And so I think you need to be more cautious. I hadn't come across a collagen protein bar before, to be honest. But there are a lot of new protein bars on the market. So I think that if you are using a protein bar, in lieu of a protein shake or as a kind of meal replacement, and you're hoping to get in that 20 grams of protein, you should be aware of what exactly is the makeup of that 20 grams of protein that the bar is claiming to contain.
Yeah, you do have to check the fine print sometimes, especially with protein bars. Those things can be a minefield. You want to look at it and make sure you figure out what is the actual main source of protein here. Am I confident that it is actually giving me the lion's share of protein from that source? Because you could also have, if the first ingredient is whey and the second is collagen, now you have a really tricky process of trying to figure out, okay, how much collagen do I really think is in here, and therefore how much reasonably decent quality protein is going to be in here. Because, Lauren, you very charitably said that collagen is not as high quality as whey. Collagen's trash. I mean, collagen is not as high protein as wheat gluten. It's not as high protein, as high quality as pea. You name it. Any corn, potato, insert any food that you would eat that has any amount of protein, and it's almost certainly worse than collagen from a protein quality perspective. The reason that people like it historically was that people would say, well, collagen's the main protein in all these different tissues in our body, especially like connective tissues. People think about collagen and, ligaments and tendons and joints and things like that. And so, and even, hair, skin, nails. So people would think, I'm going to have the collagen not to replace the whey in my diet, but because I want that special protein that makes up all these other tissues in my body. And it has just a really unique amino acid profile. So people kind of view it as this weird thing that like exists in the protein world technically, but is really this kind of supplementary thing for these kind of fringe amino acids that you're trying to get in these really high quantities. That's how it used to be. But then people started saying, hey, this collagen stuff, like you were alluding to, Lauren, we can actually like work it into different fortified food products and fitness products, and it has better flavor characteristics or texture characteristics. So now we're going to treat it as if it's just one of the proteins, right? Is it whey? Is it casein? Is it egg protein? Hey, maybe it's collagen, right? And we really shouldn't be throwing it in there in that kind of context. It's just a really crappy protein. And I will admit, I was at a booth. I was just on Monday, I was at the big dietitians conference in Minnesota, like the big national one for American dietitians. And there was a booth and they said, hey, we've got a collagen product. And I was like, no thanks, kept walking. And they're like, no, it's cool. We put some tryptophan in. And I was like, you're going to have to meet me a lot closer than there, right? My biggest issue was not, I wish you put in, 0.8 grams of tryptophan and then we're going to be fine, right? It's a really unique amino acid mixture that has a lot of shortcomings if you're trying to use it for building muscle. So, Lauren, excellent point. You got to keep an eye on that. And I would also say one of my hot takes that no one has been able to talk me out of yet, and I am open to being talked out of it, the instances where people like to use collagen, I am increasingly of the belief that you might as well just use glycine. I think for when people talk about using collagen because they want to facilitate, connective tissue recovery or repair, I really think glycine is kind of the rate limiter there, and that you can get that glycine from collagen if you wish. But my hot take is that I think the real kind of physiological bottleneck there, or choke point, is just not having enough glycine available. And there's some decent modeling research to suggest that's the case. And the reason that I care about that is because glycine tends to be cheaper and it also mixes better. You can get it in a bulk powder or in capsules in a way that's just a lot easier to use than collagen, in my opinion. But all of that is to say, I think, Lauren, you and I are both pretty collagen skeptical. do you know anything about the claims people make about collagen with like hair, skin, and nails? Because you may be stunned to hear this. I do not spend a lot of time in the hair, skin, and nails literature. I'm pretty much out of the having hair business, so to speak. Don't really care about my nails. And as long as I have enough skin to just kind of keep everything wrapped up, then I'm good with skin. So I got to be honest, folks. I don't think I'm ever going to look into the hair, skin, and nail literature because ultimately I am a selfish man. But Lauren, nothing on collagen?
To your point on the connective tissue comment, as we always say when we talk about skeletal muscle adaptations, we always say that the training is the primary promoter of muscle growth, and then the protein is sort of the icing on the cake, if you will. And certainly the same thing goes for those connective tissue adaptations. You need loading in order to promote connective tissue adaptations. You're not going to just get them through supplementation. So I think that's an important point to make. As far as the hair, skin, and nails stuff, I've never seen anything particularly compelling, and the reality is that your hair and skin are exposed to so many environmental factors that are affecting the turnover and the overall health, that again, having something that is supplemented orally, you'd be much better off wearing sunscreen and protecting yourself from the external factor that is actually harming the skin, for example. And I don't know any dermatologist, for example, that would recommend consuming collagen supplements for skin.
Yeah. And when it comes to hair, if you want to show solidarity with me and join in the protest, shave your head. There's no need to be having all this hair. It's excessive.
No, yeah.
All right. We've got a question here about biceps. Everyone likes biceps. Do lat pull-downs meaningfully work the biceps for hypertrophy? Force vector seems pretty parallel to forearms for most of the movement. Where is the elbow torque coming from? How about rows? I do tend to notice a little bit of bicep stimulus when I'm doing lat pull-downs and when I'm doing rows. And, I think what I usually do with that is if you're someone who's really into counting your set volume, I think when it comes to whether you're looking at, my subjective experience or studies that look at muscle growth or, EMG studies, I think you can make a strong case that for lat pull downs and for rows, you're going to get some kind of bicep stimulus. There is some flexion of the elbow going on there. That's certainly likely to get a little bit of biceps activation. I'm not a biomechanics person. I'm not going to, draw a big force vector chart here. But I have been sufficiently convinced that there is a stimulus, certainly not a massive stimulus. Like I wouldn't say, oh, you're fine. You do lat pull downs, no need to do curls for a bodybuilding type physique. Usually people who are really into set counting, that are really meticulous about their set volume, usually they'll count things like lat pull downs as maybe half a set or some fraction of a set for bicep volume. And that's probably how I would approach it. I'd say, how many sets of biceps do we count for a set of lat pull downs or rows? I would say greater than 0 and certainly less than 1. Usually people go with a half, but if you felt like you wanted to devise your own fractional formula, more power to you. What do you think about that, Lauren?
Agreed. And I also think the grip affects how much the biceps are going to contribute. So for example, if you were going to do an underhand pull down or an underhand row, you would feel more contribution of the biceps, and therefore you perhaps be stronger in those movements if you have relatively underdeveloped lats.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and grip, especially when you talk about lat pull downs and rows, there are so many different grips to choose from. So I've actually used that strategically because I'll be totally honest, sometimes I actually dislike the fact that my biceps get, depending on the grip, quite a stimulus from certain types of lat pull downs. And sometimes I'm like, hey, I'm going to do the biceps later. I'm just trying to really focus on lats here. Sometimes the bicep stimulus is actually a limiting factor for me. And so in that case, I actually, seek out a particular type of grip or attachment that is going to minimize my bicep involvement if I'm trying to separate that out. So play around with some grips, and you may love the fact that you're getting a good bicep stimulus. You may hate it, and there are different options available to kind of tailor your experience as you see fit. Okay, the Greek Trojan has a question for Zordos. And so the question is, I thought that the Greek Trojan was just going to hold on to it, but they posted it a little bit lower. So, does cardio training work like resistance training, where it takes a lot less volume to maintain adaptations once you make them, or is it more transient? Thinking of doing a strong cardio block. In the short term, there is, I believe, evidence to suggest that you can maintain a lot of your cardiorespiratory fitness adaptations if you cut volume and keep your intensity high. So like if you were involved in a sport where cardiorespiratory fitness and endurance were important, you should be able, when periodized across a season sensibly, to kind of take your foot off the gas when it comes to volume at certain periods of the year, ramp up the intensity, and still do pretty well with that. But what I said previously for Helms's theoretical gains question also holds here, where I think, there's a limit to that in terms of how long that'll work out. I don't think that you can just kind of lean on super low volume and high intensity and hope to keep those volume-induced cardio improvements forever. And I would also say that, Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right. I believe that detraining when it comes to cardiorespiratory fitness happens in many cases even more rapidly than it does for resistance training type things. Like when we talk about, how long we'll be able to pull this off, I expect that window to be a little bit tighter for trying to maintain top-end cardiorespiratory fitness indices, whereas you can probably drag that out a little bit longer if you're mostly focused on something like hypertrophy, for example. So all that is to say, my view of the literature the last time I checked in on it is there is a similar kind of effect where volume can save you in a pinch if you want to drop down the volume and maintain that progress. However, there's a finite time window, and it's probably a little bit shorter than we see with lifting-oriented adaptations. Now, Lauren, this is another one where if you come in with level 10 confidence and contradict me, I'm going to defer. So you let me know. Is that your understanding of the topic, or would you like to argue?
No, I'm same page. 100%.
Okay. All right. So we got another question here. How important is it really to count reps and track weights if you're training to/beyond failure? Assuming sets are in the optimal range and all other variables are optimized, set volume, technique, and so on. So the question is basically, hey, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to do a certain number of sets, I'm going to take them to failure. Doesn't really matter if I'm, doing a specific number of reps with a specific load, or can I just go in and kind of get it done and tire myself out? Lauren, why don't you take a crack at this one first? I'm self-conscious about me always getting the first shot. So what do you think of this question?
Well, what I'm not getting from the question is how important is it for what? So, how important is it for continued hypertrophy? How important is it for strength adaptations? How important is it for overall health? How important is it for adherence? I'm not getting what the goal is, and that's kind of first and foremost.
Lauren, you're new around here. The goal is always bigger muscles. Okay. When you don't know, put in bigger muscles. That's the goal.
So when I see 2 failure, then I mean, that's reasonable. However, how do you know to up the weight if you don't recall what you did last week? If you have that all in your head, then yeah, I guess. Or if this is all a kind of an auto-regulated approach as to I'm going to go do my warm-up set, how does that feel? And then based off that, then I select my load. But this is a wishy-washy approach, because just because you're going to failure doesn't mean that you're going to accomplish the same and or more volume than you accomplished last week or the week before or last month or the month before. And so that's where it gets a little nebulous to me. And so if you're saying, all right, we're always going to do 4 sets of 8 to 10 to failure, and we're upping the weight as we go, and you are cognizant of the fact that you are increasing load on a fairly regular basis, then I think that's fine. But that's rare, and that's certainly rare to sustain for an extended period of time. So I would just make sure you're doing the same exercises on the same equipment, and you're targeting the same rep ranges, and you're being mindful of what you did the past few weeks and then what you're doing these few weeks. If you don't want to literally write down everything you did every single session, I think that's okay. When you talk about going beyond failure, that's where I take issue with this, because beyond failure implies partial reps, and those are very difficult to quantify. And so if you're saying, oh, I got the weight up this much, but you don't actually have any way to measure that, then that creates a sort of difficult realm in which you're going to be able to say, I for sure did more than I did last week.
Now, when they say beyond failure, I could be wrong, but I also would maybe loop in things like drop sets, where they say I went to failure here, but then dropped and did more. But I still think that's
different then.
Yeah. But I agree, especially like if you are really interested in optimization, right? So if you're like, if I leave 1% of my gains on the table, I'm going to be livid, absolutely crestfallen. Then yeah, you probably want to take a little bit more deliberate approach into how you're administering the dose of your training. Having said that, as someone who's been really like on and off with my training as I've been navigating, my chronic pain, nerve-related issue over especially the last couple years as it's gotten worse and worse. For me, I'm like, listen, optimal's out the window. I'm in the gym to have fun. I know the basic principles of what I'm trying to do here. And even if I'm not going to failure or beyond failure, let's say I decide, for my compounds, most of my exercises, I'm going to take them to like a 2 RIR, work my way toward a 1, and then maybe the last set I go for it and go to failure, go to RIR of 0. What do I care? If someone's got the 40s and the 35s are the only thing there, I'm going to grab them. I'll do more reps. I'll get to my same reps and reserve target. If I was going to do it on that machine, but this one's open now and I don't feel like waiting, whatever, I'll go and take that same approach and kind of, mix things in. So, it's not to say that you can't train that way. And I really, personally, at this stage in my lifting life, I value flexibility and, kind of that ability to auto-regulate and shift things around as I go. I value that really highly. That's very important to me, just in terms of subjectively enjoying my workout. So if you find yourself in that situation, you may not have everything perfectly optimized, and you do need to make sure that the one thing I would say you have to be really mindful of is having some kind of progress checks in place, right? So if you're just kind of going through and saying, oh yeah, maybe I'll grab the 50s, maybe I'll grab the 55s, who cares? And there's no consistency to it, and the rep ranges are all over the place, and the loads used are all over the place. You may want to check in once every so often and have some objective indicator to figure out, am I getting better at anything here? My arms getting bigger? Are my clothes fitting differently? Have I gained weight, lost weight? Am I able to do more reps or more weight with a given exercise? Like, you probably want to put some checks in place, because it can put you in a situation, not like I've ever done this or experienced this, but I definitely have, where you get into the flow of that and everything's kind of, unstructured, and you just kind of spin your wheels for a while, because there's no objective metric to kind of remind you, like, hey, you probably ought to be pushing that a little bit harder than you are. So that would be my caveat, is if you want to go that route, no big deal. But you probably want to make sure you have some metrics in place to track, to see if you're spinning your wheels or really making some forward progress there. All right, Lauren, we got a question about fat timing. Any positive, negative effects consuming it at a certain time, such as before and after workouts, early in the day versus late in the day, etc.? I think I've answered something very similar to this before, so I'll give the brief answer and see if Lauren has any additions or corrections. But I would say with fat timing, you can't do great with it. You can only mess it up. And I would say messing up fat timing takes exactly two forms. One is you have a whole bunch of fat before your workout, and it messes up your workout. Not because of any like weird physiology and biochemistry and stuff like that, just because you haven't digested that meal well enough, and you just feel like crap when you're working out. Like, you literally have stomach discomfort because you had a giant dose of fat before you worked out. That has happened to me. I don't recommend it. I do limit my fat intake a little bit before workouts, especially if I'm having a real fatty meal. The other way I think you can mess up fat intake is some people notice, not all, that if they have a really big fatty meal before bed, it impairs their sleep quality and disrupts their sleep. And so that would be another instance where you could kind of mess up fat timing. Outside of that, I think those are really the only two things I tell people to think about with regards to fat timing. But I'll be curious to hear if Lauren has anything to. All right, folks. I think Lauren's Skype just crashed, but that's okay. I think people should still be able to hear me. At least that's my impression. Who knows? Maybe Lauren just resigned in anger and decided, you know what? I'm signing off. I don't want to be part of this anymore. Either way, we're still here, and I'm going to keep on talking, folks. So you can look at the home screen of my Skype, and I'm going to keep going through some of these questions. Let's see here. I think I can get an image of me up on the screen while we're working. Some people enjoy being able to see the person that's talking, especially when you're on YouTube. So here we go. Now we're looking at me. Appreciate your patience, folks. It's late at night. I'm not as good at thinking on my feet this hour of the day. Uh-oh, Lauren's calling. Lauren, you're back online. We're live, so don't say anything that either of us will regret. Let's see, showing you in the call screen. There we go. We're back to normal. I've been trying to buy some time and yammering here. Luckily, no extremely embarrassing conversations on my Skype page when the window disappeared, so that's always nice. But yeah, Lauren, we had a little conversation going there about fat timing. Did you have anything to add outside of don't have a ton of fat before bed and don't have a ton of fat right before your workout?
I think as long as your fat intake is within a reasonable range. I know you've talked before about sort of minimums, then yeah, I think you covered it well.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely want to get enough fat in, no question about that, but timing usually is not, certainly don't need to thread a needle or be hyper specific with it. Someone mentioned that they're watching my episode on RP's YouTube channel. I appreciate that. I had a good sit down with Mike Israetel. We had a nice long, like 3-hour chat about all things physiology. I need to check in and see how much of that they've released. If they've released the whole thing, then hopefully people have been brave enough to make it through the entire discussion. But appreciate the support there. Now, there's a question about some range of motion and resistance curve stuff. I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. This is a veiled way to sneak in a question about length and partials, which have been categorically banned as a topic because we get a question every single week. No, in reality, this is a question about a recent paper and some pros and cons potentially about the design and some of the choices that went into how the study was kind of put together or planned. I believe that Helms is actually going to review this in the upcoming issue of the Mass Research Review, if memory serves. And so I don't want to steal his thunder. And I'm sure that he is going to want to talk about that on office hours at a later date. So, folks, I will, when he's ready, when he's written his article, I will temporarily lift the ban on length and partial content and let him do all that and talk about it as much as his heart desires. Okay, let's see some other questions we got here. I'm scrolling down. Ooh, someone said shout outs to Colenso-Semple. I don't know if that was a typo, if we're getting back into the hashtag kind of thing.
I think we're hashtagging.
Okay, fair enough. Lauren,
I'm seeing your Skype screen right now. Maybe I'm on a delay.
You're seeing mine?
Yeah.
Well, no big deal.
I found a question that was submitted.
Okay.
On which you can do as a reminder. You can submit questions if they come to mind in the middle of the week and it's not a Wednesday. And so you can give us a heads up and then perhaps we'll answer them. But this person said, could you study human hyperplasia by counting muscle fibers in the tibialis of cadavers and comparing groups that did or did not have a driver's license? The idea being most people use their right foot, and therefore there would be potential muscle fiber splitting in the driving foot. The reason I thought this was an interesting question, or at least one worth addressing, was actually just to kind of point out how we measure muscle growth. Because when we look at a paper and we talk about lean mass measured via DEXA, for example, or ultrasound muscle thickness measured at a particular site, or even ultrasound like stitched together to measure cross-sectional area, when we look at actual muscle fiber hypertrophy, each of those methods are distinctly different. And so I think it's just worth noting that if you're looking at a paper that is pointing to hypertrophy as a measure of one of these particular outcomes, you need to just be aware of their strengths and limitations. And so what this person asked was, if you're doing a cadaver analysis, essentially you can like actually pull out the entire muscle. Obviously we can't do that in a living person. But even if we could do that, the idea of counting every single fiber is really, really unrealistic. And so certainly when we look at measuring muscle hypertrophy, or even fiber quantity or fiber type in a human, we're taking a really small muscle biopsy, let's say 50 milligrams, maybe 100, like the size of the top of a pencil eraser at most. And then from there, with your little chunk of muscle, you can tease out single fibers, but typically you don't do that and then measure all of them. You'd maybe tease out a few of those fibers and measure those diameters and then get kind of an average fiber size. And if you're looking for fiber typing, then you might apply a stain and then look for, of that small sample, what can we kind of extrapolate to the broader muscle. So just as a kind of point of methodological awareness, if you will, whenever we're looking at fiber type outcomes, especially ones that are longitudinal, it's always a very, very small amount of tissue, and then analyses are done to make a assumption about the whole muscle. It's never a whole muscle measurement. So I just thought it would be helpful to point that out for people, because that's one of the criticisms of those methods is obviously once you pull out the biopsy from that particular piece of that particular muscle, when you go back in a couple centimeters lower on the quad, let's say, you're measuring arguably a slightly different area of that muscle. And so yes, we can see some changes. This is really good for acute adaptations or cell signaling, muscle protein synthesis. But when we're looking at actual growth, it's probably not the best measure.
Now, I will say, Lauren, I believe that research in this general genre does exist. I'm looking at a study right now where they said that they, now this one they took, it says whole autopsy left and right anterior tibialis muscles of 7 previously healthy young men ranging from 18 to 32. I have heard of studies that do look at cadavers and compare dominant and non-dominant arm or leg muscles, and do seem to find some evidence of hyperplasia. However, I have not read any of them closely enough to see if they are subject to the methodological pitfalls that you mentioned previously. But if the listener is just asking broadly, like, hey, might there be some evidence of hyperplasia that we might observe in the study of cadavers, that work actually has been done in humans and does point, from the work I've seen, to a small degree of hyperplasia that is probably not super relevant to people who lift weights, probably not really modifiable in any intentional way, but nonetheless interesting physiologically speaking. Have you heard anything along those lines? Because I'm digging back to like textbooks at this point rather than reading the papers themselves.
It's really difficult because you need a baseline to then say these are new fibers, these aren't just larger fibers. And with the technology that we have, it's, you can get a section of muscle and put it under a microscope and then feed it into a program that will give you approximate measurements, will give you approximate fiber counts, but that's at a very small level. There's staining that we can say, what is the myosin heavy chain content, and that will give us, what we would refer to as fiber type. But as far as to say this is a result of fiber splitting and creation of new fibers, there's evidence of that in animals. There's very limited evidence of that in humans as far as I'm aware.
All right, good stuff. So Lauren, we're coming up on time here. Probably a good time to kind of scan the chat, see if there's anything that you really want to address before we go. In the meantime, I'm going to address one thing that I saw in the chat. Actually, I'm going to address two things. First of all, someone had asked about tips to help people eat more protein. Usually when people are struggling to eat more protein, usually it means that they are probably not a big meat eater, especially in America where a lot of protein heavy dishes include a lot of meat. And so one thing I like to do is kind of open people's eyes to the idea that there are other things out there that aren't meat. And a lot of times people aren't eating a bunch of meat because either they don't enjoy those foods very much, or what I found is that meat is actually sometimes kind of a pain in the butt to cook and prepare and keep fresh and things like that. You know, you have to basically meal prep it in batches, and it wasn't really for me. So even back when I had never really contemplated becoming a vegetarian for ethical reasons, I actually didn't eat a lot of meat because I was too lazy. And I would eat a lot of Greek yogurt. I would eat a lot of cottage cheese. And nowadays, you know, you kids don't know how good you have it. Because when I was young, protein shakes were terrible. They had chocolate and vanilla, and they were all very chalky and gross, and they were very bad. Nowadays, they're great. And in fact, even if you don't like chocolate and vanilla milkshakey type flavors and consistencies, there are now multiple companies that make protein drinks that essentially are like the consistency of a juice. And they have juice-like flavors, right? Instead of having like chocolate or vanilla, you can have like orange or mango or fruit punch or blue raspberry. And so I would encourage people to consider some of those options for people that maybe are struggling to get a high protein intake consumed. And then also I would mention, there have been more than a few times in my life where someone's like, I can't get this client to eat enough protein. And I say, oh, what is their body size and how much are you having them eat? And it's like triple what they need. And I'm like, okay, well, how about you meet them halfway and give them a more sensible recommendation that's still completely sufficient for their goals. So I should acknowledge that before you start saying what's going wrong here, maybe look at the protein number and make sure that it's not super duper high. The other thing I saw in the chat I wanted to address is someone mentioned a study where people took creatine and had a temporary improvement on memory. This is an interesting area. Like, I just had a chat with Sean Arndt, who's department chair down at South Carolina. Really, really good scientist. He's been in the sport nutrition world for a while. And he was talking about some research that he was really optimistic about with creatine and brain health. The stuff I've seen, while I fully respect his opinion to the extent I'm going to dig back into it based on his assessment and appraisal of that topic. But from the stuff I had seen last time I looked into it, I was honestly not super moved or compelled by the creatine and cognitive function and memory type data. The stuff I had seen was indicating, the typical maintenance doses that we take for creatine probably aren't changing brain creatine content that much. You may need to go way higher, like 20, 30 grams a day to really move the needle in terms of brain creatine content. And the one study that a lot of people really like to show is a study where they said, well, we know that, people should be taking creatine for cognitive function because when vegans took creatine, they had improvements in their memory and performance cognitively, whereas omnivores did not. And therefore, we can infer that because omnivores eat more creatine in their diet, this shows the kind of proof of principle that if you're on a low creatine diet, you should replace that to restore memory and cognitive performance. That all sounds fine, but the big caveat is that's not really what the results found. The results indicated that vegans were largely unimpacted by whether or not they were taking creatine. And the omnivores actually had a pretty substantial reduction in their memory and cognition. So the idea was not that creatine made vegans smarter. It was that creatine made omnivores dumber. I don't believe that to be true. I think it was just an artifact. I don't think it's a finding that would replicate if people attempted to. But it's a really interesting case where people just fully misinterpreted the main result of that paper. And then when you play the game of telephone, it went from performance dropped in omnivores but not vegans, it got turned around to this was great for vegans and useless for omnivores. So the directionality and magnitudes got a little bit twisted when people relayed that finding. But if you go back to the paper, the actual interpretation as I see it is that vegans had no change at all from creatine, and omnivores, for a reason I don't believe is legit, got dumber. And so that obviously is not a headline that picked up as much. And again, I want to reiterate, I don't believe that cognitive negatively impacts cognitive performance or memory in anyone, regardless of their meat intake. I think that was a spurious finding that would not replicate. All right, Lauren, I have chewed up a bunch of time, giving you ample time to choose a question to wrap up the show here. So what do you have for me?
Sure. So Tina was asking about unilateral exercises. So, let's say you're doing a split squat, right foot planted, and then you're going to your next side. Can you rest between the right side and the left side, or should you wait to rest until you've done your full sets on both sides? And I would say that it's up to you, because certainly for some exercises, you'll start to see your grip become an issue, and you might even see that the one leg is fatigued, even though it wasn't the quote unquote working leg of the first side of the set. And so if you don't rest in between sides, and therefore the second side is always getting a raw deal, or like you're never able to complete as many reps because you're a bit fatigued wherever that may be, then it's certainly worth taking a bit of rest. You don't have to take a couple minutes. I would just say, auto-regulate your rest periods, like we always say. And that's totally fine to do it when you're thinking about the context of a taxing unilateral exercise. If you're really hell-bent on not taking that rest in between side A and side B, then I'd say when you are cycling through those exercises from workout to workout, I would alternate the side in which you start that unilateral exercise. So don't always go right, left, alternate between right, left, and then the next time you do it left, right.
All right. Good stuff, Lauren. I want to take a moment to appreciate the chat. A lot of funny stuff in the chat tonight. Thank you, folks, for making it lively and enjoyable. If you haven't yet, make sure that you like the video on YouTube. That helps us in many ways that I don't fully understand, but I get the general principle. Someone asked when the IPO is for Tier 5 supplements. Surely that's a line of supplements that I need to release, and keep an eye out for that. I appreciate everyone for making the chat fun and lively, and for providing some great questions. Regrettably, as is normally the case, we weren't able to get to all of them, but I like the fact that we got to a lot of them. If we didn't get to your question this week, please do try again. Hopefully we'll see you next week so we can answer some questions. Although I should mention, I believe next week we might actually be very, very light on the questions, because I do believe we're going to have a researcher come in to talk about a recent preprint that was posted. So the paper has not been peer-reviewed yet, but they published their kind of first draft of the paper. I'm not going to give away names or topics just in case the plans fall through. I don't want to make them look like a jerk if we have scheduling issues. But anyway, I believe we're going to have a researcher come on and do a little live interview and hopefully answer a couple questions along the way. But that'll be next week, exactly 7 days from today. So everyone, once again, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to spend Wednesday nights with you. Thanks to Lauren for joining me, and everyone, we have a great episode to look forward to in 7 days.